Hello everyone, and welcome back to Talking Points with KPI, episode number 37. Today we are going over a hitting trends blog that is written by Chase, Dan, and then Erik sprinkled his little two advice in it. So we're going to get right into it. So we talked about the pitching trends and all that and how you guys have gotten a lot of athletes in this facility. The hitting trends one wasn't as specific as the pitching one was because you guys range from 10-year-olds all the way to college athletes that range from 24 years old. So Chase, Erik, or Dan, doesn't matter who. Talk about how this trend started for you guys and where you wanted to take it.
Yeah, it started with, I think just getting the force plates in general, right? Being able to measure how much an athlete is actually putting into the ground and how they use that, right, is big because we're, when you get to the hitting side of things, there's a lot of things that go into that, and it gets kind of complicated. So being able to have a unit of measurement or multiple units of measurement on the strength side that we can tie into then like how these guys are actually producing on the field and the metrics that come out of like what we measure in here. And that's basically where the start is. Like now we can start seeing, okay, what the work that you put in on the strength floor, like how does that actually apply?
Yeah. I think we had talked about doing this like a statistical analysis. We want to go in depth. We want to find correlations, causations, whatever we can do with the vast amount of data that we have on multiple fronts. We don't have the expertise to do that. So we were like, okay, let's just gather the numbers and just see. Like, let's look for trends versus causation or correlation, because at the end of the day, like, we want to, and I'll steal this line from Erik, like, we want kids who fall into the rule versus the outlier. We have plenty of outliers in this building, but when a kid sits down for us, for majority of the time, they don't check some of the simple boxes that they know they need to check. They want to go after the perfect swing. They want to go after the home run. They want to go after the aesthetically pleasing, approach at the dish, where it's like, dude, you weigh 120 to 140 pounds. Yeah. Doesn't matter what your swing does. Yeah. You might have the greatest swing in the world. So,
and this is like a logical next step to what we did when we moved into this building and started KPI, which basically was, hey, like we're going to stop using other facilities and other people's data for our purposes. We have enough capacity in here and technology in here to start collecting data ourselves. And then it was our hitting program, right, the pre-contact measurements, and then it was the post-contact measurements, the exit velocities, the launch angles, all that. So that was our first step. And then this was the next step, which is like, hey, we have all this data collected. Let's cross-reference and look for trends now. Like taking that silo-less approach and being like, there are probably some stuff in there, some patterns in there that we can pick up on and then use that to motivate athletes and to program them better.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I want you guys touched on it just a little bit briefly, but go into the certain definitions that you would see a hitter go into as a trend, whether it was, like you said, little body weight, low exit velo, and even thanks to the sports place, like you said, Hawkins Dynamics, you get to see Rel Pro and BRFD. So if you guys wouldn't mind going in for a little bit of those.
We'll connect a little bit too to the physical assessment, because I think that's the next stage is, okay, we have this large gap between skill and physical performance and skill performance, and I think that there's a way to bridge the gap a little and get those things a little tighter. But yeah, as far as the Hawkins Dynamics force plates, braking rate force development's the first thing that we look at. It's pretty simple. It's just how much force you put into the ground, but more importantly, how quickly you put that force into the ground. So I say it's to every kid, like, I do not care if you deadlift 1,000 pounds. You have plenty of football buddies who can deadlift, squat, and bench way more than you. They can't hit a 90-mile-an-hour fastball. And so it is the rate at which you express that force. And I think, putting it into that light, that, just going and getting after it in the weight room and saying, oh, look at my deadlift. We had a kid who showed up, he had a video of him deadlifting 750 pounds. Yeah, there are kids in here who hit the ball harder than him. He has a massive engine. He's the biggest engine in this building. Yeah. And there's kids who hit better than him and hit the ball better than him and are better baseball players. So just going after that is most athletes that show up at the door that most have never worked out before. Yeah. Second to that, I have started working out, but I typically just go after strength. What's my max force output? And we know that that's a good place to start, but we have to progress beyond that.
Yeah. And Chase, I'm going to try to tie this in with CLA. So giving them certain things to work on, like exit velocity, and even in the weight room, body weight, how have you seen that transfer into their sessions in here?
Well, a lot of it is like I have to understand what a kid can and cannot do, right? And so if I'm trying to, just an easy example is if I'm trying to get a kid to, stay on his backside longer, but he's not strong. Well, it's like, that's a problem that we're going to have to deal as we go through with the S&C staff collaborating with us, right? And like this is the whole idea is like, all the simple things that we as hitting coaches like to tie on to, like that's part of what the force plate and the physical assessment will allow me to do, is like be able to see, like, can he actually physically do the thing that I need him to do, right? And breaking rate of force development is a big one, right? Because the same kid that has the big engine, like, he can get his swing off, but there's a lot of other things that go into that, right? Because then we're talking about, like, some of these other metrics and stuff of like.
Yeah, it's the constraints-led approach piece where we think about those three entities. You have the task of the environment and the organism. Yep. Most people skip over the athlete. They just try and polish with different tasks. Mm-hmm. They manipulate the environment, meaning I can hit in practice, but I can't in games. Yep. Or I'm going to get this one drill that's going to help me with my front shoulder flying open, and then, oh yeah, you do it, great job, good, go. But you go back to games and you fall back to your old habits, and it's because you're not fixing the true issue, which is, first and foremost, one of our trends was body weight, how big you are. Mm-hmm. Number two is that breaking rate force, how much force you put into the ground, how quickly you express it. Yeah. If you don't check those two boxes, you likely will have a swing compensation, and or your coach will create a swing compensation because they're going to ask you to do something you're not physically capable to do. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And if also you want to get more explanation on what Rel Pro and BRFD is, go look in the podcast. I believe it's number 13, where we did a Hawkins Dynamics podcast. So if you want to get more in depth with that, go right in for that. But now we're going to look at some of the numbers and some of the trends that you guys did see. So out of the top 10 hitters in this facility, they would range between 170 to 180 pounds in between there. And then your bottom 10 would be the low hundreds. Blatant simple, you would see your top 10 hitters way more and are able to do more with that. Talk a little bit more about that.
Well, let's just kind of define what we did. Yep. I know it says it on the blog, but just real quick, according to our own internal rankings, we took the top 10 hitters, and the bottom 10 hitters, and then looked at these trends. So that's, I just want to preface that before they dive in too far. So, from a body weight point of view, it was pretty simple. Mm-hmm. The bigger guys, the stronger guys, are the better hitters. Yeah. Is it as simple as that? Of course not. All right, but these are trends. We're looking for a rule that we can push people into to help most of the athletes out in here. And it sounds overly, I guess, simplistic and on the surface, but a lot of people need to hear this. Like, you need to get bigger and stronger or more powerful to be better at your skill. Yes. And so many people want to take lessons and go play 400 games this year, but it boils down to the fact, and this is why we did it, and this is why we present it like this. We can go much deeper than this, but it would get kind of granular and hard to understand. This is real simple to understand. Get bigger, stronger, and faster while you're working on your skill to be better. Yep.
Yeah, and I think that's why I like this so much, is it helps, ultimately we're just trying to help athletes make the better decision of understanding, do I need to go play 400 more games, or do I need to actually work on getting stronger and being able to handle the workload that I will get in college, or if I want to get to college, I have to get stronger so I can hit the ball harder. I got to get bigger. All these things that obviously matter, but sometimes that decision's not as easy as you think, right?
I liken it to, and I like making analogies all the time. I've probably done on all the podcasts. Like, you taking your Honda Civic out to the racetrack and racing a bunch of laps, and you're not going to transform into a Ferrari.
But even if you're a really good race car driver,
even if you're the best, the best approach, and you're so much game IQ, and you're so good at baseball. It's like the Ferraris at the end of the day are gonna beat you. Yeah. And so going and playing more games, as important as that is, to test to see the off the field stuff is actually transferring to the field. Playing more and more games is a massive myth that has been sold to the average player. The belief in the 10,000 reps. You need to play more games. You need to play better competition. So again, if you're a Honda Civic, you're gonna lose the race at the end of the day, and you're either gonna have inconsistent performances, or unfortunately, at some point, you're gonna get injured. If you're asking the body to do something it's not physically capable of doing, it's gonna break down on a couple different fronts, and injury is another one.
Yeah. Mm. So staying on the health side, we talked about it a little bit, but bridging the gap with hitting, strength, and then you bring in that assessment piece. Talk about how big that has been for not only writing the trends and seeing that these things, but also the kids and their adjustment to the sessions.
Yeah, I'd say I'm going to keep hitting on this analogy. Like, if you as a hitting coach, I liken that to be like, okay, I'm sitting in the passenger seat, and I got my hitter next to me driving. That'd be probably a good hitting coach. Most hitting coaches, they hop in the driver's seat and tell you, here's exactly what we're going to do today. Here's the answers to fixing your swing. I'm going to be the person, the mechanic, who's going to fix all these issues, and hey, you're along for the ride. And then basically the lesson goes great, and then you're on your way, and then you feel good, but the problem is you weren't driving the car. Yeah. If we don't even have an understanding of the car, its frame, its tires, its engine, its brakes, it's understanding of how to drive the car. If we don't have any understanding on that front, you're going to continue to have that I guess limitation when you get to games. You're going to fall back to old habits because again, your body is going to do two things. It's going to protect. We want to stay healthy. We want to stay safe, and it's going to go always the path of least resistance, usually the least efficient, not the optimal. Where we want optimal movement, we want optimal performance. So, I think some of the physical things that we've seen for a lot of our hitters is just an understanding of how their lower half really morphs to the stress of hitting. For the most part, everybody is asymmetrical. We're swinging from right to left. So it's going to change our lower half and some of the range of motions we have access to. We're going to have a morph to our spine. Again, we're always rotating from our right to our left. Yeah. So we're going to lose rotation to our dominant side. We're going to gain rotation to our non-dominant side. Not all the time, but most of the time. Yeah. And then some of the things, adaptations from throwing, that's going to affect us. Maybe getting into launch is what we've been talking about a lot lately. Is shoulder range of motion and how that's going to affect launch. So so those are some of the physical trends that we've been seeing, and I hope in the next year is to again connect these dots a lot closer. Where here are the optimal ranges for hip range of motion. Here are the optimal ranges for spine, shoulder, for you. Yeah. And then we're held accountable to does that help you hit the ball hard as often as possible? Yeah.
Well, just to hit off of that, to kind of toot our horn a little bit, I think this is the difference maker in the individualization, is understanding, like, if I have a kid that puts a lot of force in the ground, has no range of motion, that plan is different than somebody who puts a lot of force in the ground, has a ton of range of motion, right? Those two things need to be attacked differently, just because of how we understand the car, right? And then being able to get them, like, ultimately, like, adjusting the plan as we go. And that's why we test and retest and do all these things, like, constantly, to be able to see how the plan is working, how it's developing, and then be able to move forward from that to get them to the next level.
Absolutely. And we talked about it a little bit with the CLA podcast, but I want to touch on it a little bit more. How have you seen, and ultimately you're giving these athletes a little bit of freedom to be able to adjust to their own selves and ask questions and be like, hey, should I be doing this instead of this? Do you think this works? And then you guys, like you said, you're not driving the car. You're letting them drive it while giving them guide rails to kind of where to go. How have you seen them adjust to that?
It's actually not. It's super nice to see, but it's hard. You're in an environment where the hitting coach drives the car most of the time, right? And so then what happens is then you get into games, and then they're driving the car, and now they don't know what to do, right? And so we have to be able to challenge these kids and get them to understand their own body, so then they can actually figure these things out. Because we can't swing for them, we can't play for them, and so we have to give them the opportunity to get the responsibility. Or to own their own swing, right? But own their own development on the S&C floor, and that's what force plates allow us to hold them accountable there, right? And then we have all the metrics for the hitting side that allow us, to hold them accountable there, right? And then we can take these things, build the plan, and get them to keep going. Yeah. They react to it very well once you give them the power. Like you got to give these kids a little bit more credit. Like they will take responsibility if you allow them to. You just have to set the environment, right? And then having all the kids like compete against each other allows those things to kind of connect.
And this is one of the many reasons this is a probably more advantageous setup than a one-on-one lesson. If you go to a one-on-one lesson and you feel like crap after you walk out of that lesson because your coach just challenged you and he made you, he basically made you fail a ton, you're probably not going to go back to that coach. Yeah. It was boring and I got my butt kicked and I didn't do very well. Mm-hmm. Okay, we enjoy that in this environment. Mm-hmm. But the differentiator is, one, we're all in on that approach, and two, there's guys around you going through the same thing, and you get to feed off each other and you get to compete with each other, and it's just such a better learning environment than the alternative.
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to cut you off real quick. I'm sorry, but I want to talk about that point. So that's a big part of baseball, right? Failure. That's like the whole thing. You hear it since you were a little kid that you're going to fail in this game. Failing in here. How have you seen them? Kind of their mindset kind of shift, because if you fail on the field, like you said, your coach is going to get into you, or if you're one-on-one, they have no choice but to tell you you're wrong. Out here, they have to talk to their friends and they figure it out with their buddies.
Well, exactly, right? Like if we go belly button fuzz off the machine and they're all getting their butts kicked, they'll start rooting for each other, just like a team does. Like it's like, oh, you got it, and then again, you can't get that in a lesson. You get that in here. And again, the brain-body connection and the motor skill learning, all that research we've talked about in the past, it's so strong. Mm-hmm. But the emotional environment aspect of things in here is huge.
I think it bleeds into the other areas. You see a kid who's in the cages, dominating and just crushes it, and then he gets into the weight room, he dominates and he crushes it. It starts building this culture of like, hey, this is how we do things. Because don't get me wrong, our culture is fragile. We do have kids who come in here, they crush in the cages, they leave, or they do half their sets. And I think it's funny, kids think that we don't know, but we know, because we know with the data that we run, we know with the performances in the cages, and we know the performance on the field. We have a feel for all of those things, and it enables us to have that conversation. And I think that's another piece where like, that's the best hitter in your league. That's the best, that guy is, everybody wants him at the dish when the game's on the line. And that's how he carries himself in here and how he does his sessions. Like, that is extremely valuable. And I think it was going back to how we chose these trends. I was giving Chase a hard time. It's like, okay, you choose who you would say who your top 10 best hitters in here. And we'll probably need to follow up with this and put their like on-field production. Yeah. But for the most part, I say all 10 of these guys are killing it for their high school teams. Yeah. But it literally came down to the first metric we looked at was exit velocity. But there were some other metrics that you took into account, and then there was also a subjective piece. There was an art to it. Like, hey, I know this kid's swing is going to have an opportunity for a lot of success on the field. And then they picked the bottom 10. I was like, come on, guys. It's basically freshmen and sophomores versus juniors and seniors. Like, number one. Number two, like the body weight thing, like it's basically the biggest kids versus the smallest kids. So I think that there were some other small pieces that we need to tease out a little bit further. But I think that this also lends to sticking to a process. When you go from one person to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next, I had to get a good game with that coach, so I'm going to stick with them. And all of a sudden I had a bad game, I'm going to go over to this coach. I'm going to go to that travel team, switch to this travel team. The inconsistency piece makes sense that you have an inconsistent approach and success on the field. And we're talking about just baseball. Softball is even worse. Where, and you have both ends of the spectrum. You have no success and you stick with the same person, or again, you're hopping from person to person. And so I think that also lends to it. Almost every one of the guys that were chosen in the top 10 have been in the building within our systems and our program for at least a year, if not beyond that. And that breeds an opportunity for continued success. So
we touched on that in the pitching breakdown, Justin's 2-year review, which was amazing. If you haven't seen that, go look at it. But just the consistency that the athletes keep to put in and continue to get the data, and they now are reaping the benefits of all that. I'm going to get on to my last point, kind of the theme of every end of the podcast, but what's next? What's next for the hitting trends? What's next for these athletes in this building for that side of things?
I'd say to start off, it's the more and more we do things like this, the more data we get these easy answers for. Like, work hard, be consistent, and you get better. Who would have thought? We know this, right? But it's still like, you're now it's summertime. Now is it time to play summer ball, or is it to train? Like, these are the things that we're trying to empower athletes to make the call that needs to be made, which is you're not in the pros yet, so we need to continue to work. And when you're in the pros, turns out you still need to continue to work. And I think the next step is obviously we want to get more granular in these things to be able to say, okay, like, how close can we get to A + B = C, right? Which is easier said than done in a sport like ours. But I think it's, that's the big deal is like, can we continue to empower athletes to make the right call and do the best thing for their development?
Then we're going to connect the dots stronger between how you're built, how you move as a human being, to how you perform on the field. I think we're going to look into connecting dots within, lower half, torso, arms. I think we're going to continue to use our force plates, and we've been testing out some ideas and thinking of ideas of how we can incorporate upper body testing with lower body testing. I think we're going to start getting a little more granular of right leg versus left leg. We know that that's important and something to look into for, again, finding something in the middle between this massive expanse of like, here's who you are, here's how you perform. There's a lot of space between there, so bridging that gap is going to take a lot. And I think once that gets closer and closer, I think beyond that, and this is probably several years down the road, then we'll start answering some of the questions of approach and how should I be going about setting myself up for success in the batter's box or pregame. Where we haven't even answered anything on this spectrum of the physical development side of things and the skill development. I always put it at that last bucket. I think the last bucket we'll go after, and it's probably continues. We could probably work on all three of these areas at the same time. That tactical development, like we could do and solve all these problems. We have plenty of guys who are 180 pounds but did not have a good season this spring and they're struggling. We want to solve those problems too. But I think until then, we need to continue to connect the dots on this side of the spectrum.
And I'll touch real quick on the technology aspect of those next steps is, this was predominantly done with obviously the force plates measuring the force output, but then, we only had hit tracks in here basically the last 2 years since we opened, collecting the batted ball data. Now we have TrackMan. Okay, so now we have two, very, very robust systems, collect more data. We're going to start getting, our technology vendors are really into what we're doing, and they're opening up some more things and features to us. So as we gather this more data, we're going to be working with our technology partners to help. They're going to help us connect the dots and give us some more advanced reporting because they're pretty excited about what we're doing. So our capabilities to do more things is growing, by the day.
Yeah.
Sweet. Anything else? All right. Thank you guys very much for listening. This has been episode number 37 of Talking Points with KPI, Hitting Trends. If you want to go look more, go to www.kpimh.com. Type the blog tab. It'll be the first one up at the top. Thank you guys very much for watching. See you guys next time.
Big up.